In our search for inner truths about user experience design, I thought today we would discuss the role of trade-offs, trade-off analysis, and how central they are to our practice. Now, whether we realize it or not, when we design something, we're taking heuristics, hundreds of them, we're taking design patterns, established and also style guides, we're taking the use cases for the product, we're taking the input and output constraints such as whether there's a keyboard, whether it's for your fingers or there's just buttons, or how big the screen is. We're throwing all those up in the air and we're trying to come up with the best design solution given that. We're trying to strike a balance between all of those options. So let's take a simple example. Let's say you want to present the user with 10 options. Well, we all know that we don't want to present 10 options to somebody because it's likely to overwhelm them, and we're really going to have to pick for us at a single point in time to present 5 to 7. So let's say for the sake of argument we pick the first 6 options based on what our anticipated frequency of use is. That means the 4 remaining ones are going to be in a secondary menu or put somewhere else in a secondary way. So if a user comes to you and doesn't like the design when they're looking for option number 8, or if you do a usability test looking for option number 8 and the results are not good, you can actually sleep well at night knowing that your design is sound. The only problem could be that your assumptions are wrong. So if in fact options 1 through 6 are not the most frequent, then that could be the problem. But it's not the design, it's the assumptions. Now let's go on to a slightly more complicated example and actually look at a framework for how to do trade-off analysis. The design question we're going to look at is it better to use text or images on a button? And pretty much there's an established answer out there, which is that text is superior in most cases, and we'll see why. So here's the first example of the analysis, and I'm picking a dimension here, and that dimension is whether the image or text, whether the design essentially can accommodate abstract concepts. And then in the columns I have the different design options, and you could have more than 2. In this case we're talking about the image or the text. And you can see I've given them a rating. So an image really is not that great. Images are not that great for accommodating abstract concepts. And just to demonstrate this, here's something that I just grabbed from my Microsoft Outlook. These are really abstract ideas, and look at policy. I mean, I don't even really know what that is. There's a folder and a clock and then something else. Maybe that's a shredder. It's not clear to me, but obviously, look, that's a tough one. Then for auto archive, I think that the illustrators have done a really good job, but it's just very hard to illustrate the idea of an auto archiving. So then, but text, of course, is very good at abstract concepts. I mean, here it is: policy, auto archive, folder permissions, folder properties. It's very clear. So let's look at some of the other factors. So obviousness. So for images, I haven't given it a positive or negative, just given it a neutral rating. You could just put nothing there, like if you wanted. And then for text, as long as it's designed correctly, it in general will be really obvious because you're just going to say what you want to say. But then we look at the next factor, visual interest. We have a totally different story, where the image is way more visually interesting than the text. And then the final criteria is accessibility. In this case, I'm talking about for people over 40 who have trouble seeing small print. And the image doesn't really scale, it just gets more and more fuzzy, whereas with text, if you zoom in on it, you can just render it in higher fonts, so it really works out well. So again, these are 4 factors that I've considered, and there are probably others. So that's one really good thing about this tool or this framework, is that it's really good for laying out all the options and putting them all on the table. So when you and your design colleagues or other stakeholders are trying to look at what the best design solutions are, you're going to have lots of disagreements, but what's going to happen is all these factors are going to get put out on the table and you can put them into your chart. Now, the second really important thing to learn from this is this shows clearly that there is no such thing as a perfect design. Every design has positives and negatives, and you're just trying to strike a balance given what your desired outcome is. So if my desired outcome was to put a real emphasis on visual interest, then I would probably conclude something different, which is that actually I should just use images. So again, this is really great for defending against people who have a problem with your design, or let's say someone has something really stuck in their craw about images and there's an executive stakeholder who really wants you to use images or really thinks that's the best design solution, you can show them your reasoning and say, yes, I agree with you. Visual interest is really, for that, the images come in really well, but there's all these other factors where it doesn't perform nearly as well. Now, the person that you're talking to, the executive stakeholder, may or may not actually be swayed by this. However, they will see that you've thought about it very carefully, and so that might be enough. Now, if you disagree with the outcome, what you're going to end up disagreeing over is hopefully not what are the things that you should be talking about, what are the factors, but really the relative weighting. So that is, should accommodate abstract concepts be weighted more than obviousness or visual interest? And again, that gets back to what we already talked about, is that if you weight visual interest at 90%, then that's going to dominate everything. And this method doesn't give you those weightings. You're still going to have to decide what they are. And then the other area that you're going to have some disagreement might be actually about the negatives and the positives, about how negative something is and how positive. You might disagree about the strength or even the direction. But nothing's perfect. Now let's look at something where it's not even really clear what the outcome should be. And I'm going to talk about search versus having a really rigorous file folder system. Now, I personally am a search guy. I don't my desktop is completely strewn with all sorts of junk, and I don't really file anything anywhere. But that doesn't mean that that's like the established answer for how people should organize their desktop. So let's look at this trade-off analysis, and I'll just go through it briefly. I mean, the two design solutions are just use search primarily or use a hierarchy primarily. And on one dimension, in terms of having an ordered work area, obviously with search, if you use that a lot, you don't have an ordered work area, whereas with hierarchy you do. In terms of getting random access to stuff, in other words, just being able to get to it, search is way better because you can just type in anything you want and it'll be there, whereas with the hierarchy you actually have to go find it in your hierarchy, and it could be fairly deep. Next one is relying on memory. Search, isn't that great? If you don't know the term that you want to search for, then you're going to be, having a problem. But with hierarchy, even if you have a vague idea, you can begin to hunt. In terms of upfront work, obviously search doesn't require any upfront work because it's just done automatically, whereas hierarchy requires you to organize it yourself. And then in terms of it being useful for others, search is good because you can search whatever you want, but a hierarchy really gives you like a taxonomy and a structure to look through. Now, I've just put these in as criteria that I think are important. There would be others, and you may or may not agree with my positives or negatives, but I think actually that's kind of the point, that this example shows that there's no such thing, that the analysis itself doesn't necessarily tell you what is better. All it tells you is that depending on what various strengths and weaknesses you want, it can give you a direction in terms of what design is better. And specifically, you can tailor your design towards the usability profile of what you're trying to design for. So you might go in one direction if you're really trying to focus on first-time users versus power users or long-term users. So just as an example, if the usability profile that was really important to you was actually people who didn't create the hierarchy in the first place or didn't actually organize the information, then you would really focus on that last point, useful for others, and that might be 60% of the weighting, and that would really affect your decision. So that's to conclude this section on trade-off analysis. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that we're trading off lots of different things all the time whenever we do a design, and that this is a tool I presented that I think that can be useful. I want to thank my mentor, Tony Choi, who actually showed me this method. I'm very grateful to him. Again, thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please give me a shout.